Putin reveals the inferiority complex as he blames Boris Johnson for the continued war. We're going to read into Tucker Carlson's interview and more from this article from Byline Times, you guys. Let's go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. This is REGANELITE here with an article from Byline Times with the headline of Tucker Carlson's interview. Putin reveals the inferiority complex as he blames Boris Johnson for the continued war. In his much-vaunted interview with the Russian leader, Tucker Carlson simply allowed Putin to repeat well-worn propaganda points. But who is Putin actually talking to? Guys, while you're here, before I give my initial thoughts, if you can hit the like button and share this across social media so others are notified of this video. So, just for a caveat, for those who aren't aware, I did a live stream specifically on the Tucker Carlson interview, as well as talking about some of the other things that Putin talked about, as well as things were going in the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. I'll put a link at the end of this video if you guys want to check that out. But I wanted to cover, and I covered that from I obviously shared my thoughts as I watched the full interview, and also read from the BBC's point of view. And the reason why I'm doing another video, and I'm doing this from Byline Times, because I wanted to get a different article's perspective, but I also want to give it I give a points to some of you who may not have watched any of it and kind of are not sure what you guys make of the Tucker Carlson interview. So I'll give more of my full thoughts on there, but if you want some of my initial thoughts before we read this article. So Tucker Carlson came across very weak, very submissive, never really probed Vladimir Putin. This was not a live interview. This was pre-recorded. So Putin kind of, if he never came across, he could basically, if he mishapped anything or whatever, it could be edited out. Putin never looked like someone who was ill health either. So there were obviously stories about him in the past about him being unwell and whatnot. Didn't appear looking like that at all, but we don't know for certain. There was a lot of history that he got conflicted and confused by it as well. That he propagated certain things of history with regards to Poland and Ukraine, and things that happened with regards to World War II and how that started. He blames Poland for that, which is kind of technically not true. Germany are the ones who kind of started that. He talked about one or two other things. Also, obviously, about the rise in China. For some reason, they were talking about souls and his religion. I don't know why Tucker Carlson went there, but he did. Tucker Carlson did ask 3 times in this interview, and never really pressed him about why he hasn't talked to President Joe Biden, when he'd already asked the same question twice, and didn't really push him really hard on it. Because apparently, according to the Russian president, he hasn't spoken to Joe Biden since before the actual special operation in there. But you can make what you will of it. But if you want more of my thoughts and details, I will recommend checking out that live stream. But we'll read into it. So I'll keep sharing more of my thoughts about the interview as we go along, anyway, guys. But let's read into it from Byline Times' perspective. So, Tucker Carlson's 2-hour interview with Russian President Vladimir Putin proved to be a storm in a teacup. The Russian leader used the conversation with the former Fox News host to repeat his well-known empty phrases, and yet again justified his decision to invade Ukraine. But why did the controversial American TV shock jock give Putin an outlet for his propaganda points? Well, he might have been hamstrung-tied as well, to be fair, on the interview. Among the Russian president's ramblings and fact-free talking points was the extraordinary allegation that the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson sabotaged a potential peace deal discussed in Istanbul in the early stages of the latest invasion. Now, Rishi Sunak has come out and denied that this happened. I have, at the time of this recording, I haven't even heard Boris Johnson state that, but I'm gonna go out on a limb and say we're talking about Boris Johnson here. It is entirely possible. And I'm going to say that, and I am exaggerating a bit, it is entirely possible that someone like Boris Johnson could F up a potential peace deal between Russia and Ukraine if he was actually one of the mediators in it, because he is that dumb. It's entirely possible. I'm not saying it's true, but you just don't know with Prime Minister Boris Johnson. But I also have to stress, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and the UK government deny that this actually happened as well. So it's important to put that caveat in there. Ever since Tucker Carlson arrived in Moscow on February the 1st, he was spotted attending the Bolshevik Theatre in the capital. Russian media have also started hailing the American conservative pundit as a celebrity. Carlson was on the front page of the Evening Moscow. Oh my god. The newspaper handed out free to commuters every day on the Moscow metro, while Russian pro-Kremlin media and Telegram channels repeatedly mentioned the US journalist approximately 2,050 times over the past week. Blimmin' heck! Talk about... Jesus. My God. It's just a... Oh my God, this is... What? Oh my God. All that, as well as Putin's decision to speak with Carlson, clearly shows that many Russians, including the ruling elite, still have an inferiority complex in regard to the West. Although pro-Kremlin propaganda will certainly attempt to portray the biggest interview of 2024 as Putin's brilliant victory over the West, in reality his reliance on endorsement by the US TV shock represents a serious weakness. That, however, is unlikely to have an impact on the outcome of the upcoming Russian presidential election. By the way, that was never mentioned at all. They never talked about that in the interview. Scheduled for March 15th, 17th, as Putin's spokesman Dmitry Peskov said in August 2023 that the Russian presidential poll is not really democracy, it is costly bureaucracy, which means that the interview was broadcast mainly for the Western audience. But how effective was this kind of propaganda? Whilst Tucker Carlson undoubtedly has a serious influence on the conservative Americans, the interview with Putin will not force the United States policymakers to change their approach regarding Russia, not at least as long as Joe Biden is in office. But even if Donald Trump wins the election in November, does not necessarily mean that Washington will fundamentally change its geopolitical course and stop supporting Ukraine, which is what many in the Kremlin reportedly hope for. Now, he said that one of the things he did say in the interview, I will give a snippet, is that it doesn't really, to Putin, it doesn't really matter who the American president is. He doesn't think it will make a difference. And he just wants everyone to stop supporting Ukraine and stop funding Ukraine and let him have his way with the country. To denazification the country. That's what he wants to do, allegedly. That's what he wants to do, denazificate. I don't know, you figure it out. It's crazy, I know, but he didn't show evidence to support this as well. Then the thing is, yeah, you can either take his word for it, or you can take experts and historical experts for it as well. So, are you going to listen to the Russian president who has cost lives, or are you actually going to listen to historical experts who actually know the history here? Or why don't you Google it? Well, you've got a phone, you can Google it right now when he claims about certain things happened in history to confirm it, rather than simply take his word for value. Because I know I've come across people who are pro-Russian, who are pro-Putin, and if what he's saying is true, why don't you confirm it online? You know, or how about you can even send me some links if you can prove what Putin has said about certain things in the comment section down below if you really want. Thus, Tucker Carlson yet again echoed Moscow's ambitions without posing any challenging questions to Putin. He allowed the Russian leaders to spend almost half an hour talking about Russian history. About the history of Russian-Ukrainian relations, Putin essentially repeated what he wrote in his 2021 article on the historical unity of Russians and Ukrainians, claiming a significant part of the modern Ukraine are historic Russian lands. But when asked why he did not invade historic Russian lands when he came to power more than 20 years ago, Putin started talking about the history of the Soviet Union and blamed his predecessor Boris Yeltsin for the collapse of the USSR. He once again admitted that he wanted Russia to join NATO in 1999 and 2000, but the former US President Bill Clinton repeatedly told him it was not possible. Thus, from Putin's perspective, Russia has the right to join NATO. But if Ukraine seeks to become a member of a US-dominated alliance, it represents a threat to Russia's national security. For Putin, Ukraine's national identity is also quite problematic, which is why he still aims to denazify the country. Although Carlson did not bring the heat to the Russian leader, he did ask some very specific and practical questions that Putin refused to directly answer. Instead, he used his old mantras of his Western powers deceiving him and leading him by the nose. It was a rhetoric for his domestic audience, as Putin seems to enjoy playing the role of a native charlatan who consistently gets fooled by his Western and Ukrainian partners. Since everything about Putin is a publicity stunt, he is likely deliberately portraying himself as a good but native leader, given his significant parts of the Russian audience still buys such a narrative. Well, the reason there is because obviously he controls everything. He's controlling the media. He's controlling a lot of things within inside Russia as well. And he's been their president for a very long time as well. There are people within Russia. Now, I don't know for certain if the majority of the population want him gone, because there are some who still love him for who he is and what he's done for the motherland, of course. But there are those who are, they kind of want something different. People do want change from time to time, and he's been there for a long time. Putin also blames the former UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson for sabotaging the 2022 negotiations between Ukraine and Russia in Istanbul to end the war in its early stages. But according to Putin's ally, Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko, Russia and Ukrainian negotiators in Istanbul sought to agree on the lease of Crimea, while Oskar Ashkovich, a former advisor to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, said that from Kiev's perspective, the negotiations were so successful that the Ukrainian delegation opened the champagne bottle. Could it be that Boris Johnson actually prevented Russia from signing the de facto capitalization in Istanbul? So, even Byline Times are not ruling out the possibility that Boris Johnson may have screwed up here. For Putin, however, it is Western leaders, rather than he himself, who are responsible for the war continuing. Also blames for the Euromaidan of 2014, which resulted in the overthrow of allegedly pro-Russian Ukrainian President Volodymyr Yushkovich. Putin's old tucker that the CIA orchestrated a coup d'etat in Kiev. He, however, refuses to mention his role in that process and how he, at the request of the United States, effectively betrayed Yushkovich, pressuring him not to use force against Western-backed protesters. Tucker Carlson, on the other hand, seemed to know very little about those events or about Russian-Ukrainian relations in general. It's funny he didn't seem to have much knowledge about that and not be able to answer those questions. You think someone with his, for someone who's so popular and well known, you would think that Tucker Carlson would know that knowledge and be able to perhaps answer a question or two with regards to the so-called coup d'etat. Funny. Still, he gave Putin a chance to reach a potentially sympathetic audience to the United States. You have an issue on your border, issue with migration, issue with the national debt at 33 trillion. You have nothing better to do than fight Ukraine, Putin said during the interview. What do you mean you got nothing better to do? You have no right to be there. You have no right to be there. It's not your land anymore. It belongs to the people. It belongs to Ukraine. It belongs to the people of Ukraine. It's not. You don't have a right to it. It was a message to Donald Trump supporters and American ideologics. Oh God, not them. As certain factions within the Russian elite hope that if such a political opinion comes to power in the United States, Washington will stop funding Ukraine and allow Putin to achieve his goals in the Eastern European country. This is why the interview might have been mutually beneficial for both Putin and Carlson. Dozens of journalists are currently imprisoned in Russia for their work, and they are unlikely to be released anytime soon. Putin, however, hinted that he might free Evan Yushkovich, a 32-year-old Wall Street Journal reporter who had been jailed for almost a year on espionage charges. But if he releases the American citizen Yushkovich as a goodwill gesture without swapping him for any Russian spies being imprisoned in the West, he will yet again demonstrate a serious weakness that his propaganda will portray as another geopolitical victory. Although many Western news outlets have requested to interview Putin, the Kremlin chose Tucker Carlson because his position, according to Peskov, contrasts that with the traditional Anglo-Saxon media. It is not a secret that Putin, who does not seem capable of answering unpleasant questions, avoid debating not only one with most Western reporters, but also with Russian journalists who do not agree with the official Kremlin narrative. One thing is for sure, what Putin avoids to mention in his bureaucracy-style interview is always more important than what he emphasizes. That is why he will remain the king of empty rhetoric and rather boring speeches. And it was at times, guys, when I was watching it, there was at times it was very long-winded, especially the first half an hour. It was very long-winded. Because he just went on, he went on a long time before Tucker actually started cutting in a few times to actually ask him some questions. The whole history lesson thing was kind of like there sort of thing. Interesting though, I did find one thing interesting is that it went for 2 hours, over 2 hours, and you would think that sometimes at best, yeah, when you get an interview like these, you would get maybe 30 minutes max, maybe even 20, sometimes even just 15 minutes, yeah, for an opportunity to. But Tucker Carlson got 2 hours. And what they said in Byline Times, this guy was portrayed as a friend of the Kremlin, the friend of Russia, sort of thing among Moscow, which is bonkers because this is an American journalist, and and he really did not challenge him at all. And the thing is that if you're going to get an interview with the Kremlin, you really have to be anti-Biden. You really have to be, really against the West and really against establishment to have any chance of getting an interview with someone like him. But even Tucker Carlson was warned not to do this interview by there were stories that he was warned by the US government. It even warned him, do not do this interview. They never gave him permission. He was never given permission to do this interview. Now, there have been stories that the EU may sanction Carlson for having the interview. I don't know what the EU would do. I've heard that stories around. I don't know if that's going to happen. And there's also, I don't know if the US government are able to do anything because he will argue that he's exercising his right to free speech, which is something that is enshrined in the US Constitution. So I don't know if the US government are able to do anything either. But one thing is for certain, whether you like it or not, Tucker Carlson will be remembered as the American journalist that went into the heart of Moscow, despite everything, what everybody thinks of him, and he got to have an interview with the Russian President Vladimir Putin, something that has not been done by a Western journalist for how long now? You tell me in the comment section down below. So what did you guys make of the Tucker Carlson interview? And if you haven't watched the Tucker Carlson interview, or maybe you've just seen a few clips, what did you make of how he handled himself, of how the Russian president handled himself? What are your general thoughts on it? If you didn't watch any of it, and I can totally understand for you not watching it, what did you guys make of the article from Byline Times perspective? What did you make of some of my thoughts about the interview? Let me know what you guys think in the comments section down below. If you found this article and my views interesting, please hit the like button, be greatly appreciated. If you can, hit the losing my thoughts today. Share this across social media because others will be notified of this video, and hit the bell notification icon so others will be notified of this video. And if you want to financially support me and the work that I can do here, you can do so by becoming a YouTube member for as little as 99p or joining me on Patreon for exclusive content. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and I hope to catch you all very, very soon.